Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Thank you so much. It's nice to see some friendly faces. So hello, everyone. Kyle, I'm definitely not going to read that psychometrics book. I have been reading a book called Quiet, and it's The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. I realize it's somewhat ironic, being that I'm here today presenting for you, but there we go. So as Nicole said, my name is Tony Curvina. I am the Director of Content and Learning for the American Society for Non-Destructive Testing. Over the past couple of years, we have been heavily crafting our AI roadmap, and I've had the pleasure of experimenting with our education program over the last year. And I'm really excited to share with you all today some of the things we've learned along the way, some strategies, as well as some takeaways that you all can hopefully integrate into your own operations. Okay, so today what we're talking about is what I believe is one of the most important shifts that's happening in association education right now. It's not just the rise of artificial intelligence, right? Because we're there, it has risen. But the new expectation, it's for creating how we design learning, how we deliver value, and then how we in turn scale expertise. So we're talking, again, very practical session here. This is not hype. This is not a deep dive into the technical aspects. It's not theoretical. The goal really is today for you to leave thinking, this is doable. I have one or two ideas. Okay, so let's get started. And as Nicole mentioned, if you have any questions, please throw those in the chat. All right, so by the end of our time together today, our 1 hour, you should be able to identify some practical use cases of AI across the education life cycle. So talking about from project initiation all the way through rollout. Also understanding how AI initiatives are connected to your organizational strategy. That's a big one. All of your programs should connect to your strategy and your mission. We'll talk about that more later. We'll also look and recognize some governance and leadership considerations, particularly if you have leadership teams that are hesitant or don't really know where to get started. As I mentioned, I want to leave you with some clear next steps that you can explore immediately, a little bit of homework, if you will. Okay, so let's start with the reality check before we get into the meat of it. So McKinsey, the consulting firm, it estimates that up to 70% of work activities could be augmented by AI. That's huge, right? This is not a fad shift that we're talking about. It is structural. It is baked in. It is now part of the infrastructure. We're past the novelty phase. The conversation has really moved from should we explore AI to how fast can we responsibly implement it? If you're still in the should we explore AI phase, I have bad news for you, but it's easy to catch up, right? So AI is becoming part of the operating infrastructure of education too. It's really getting baked into, like I mentioned, all of these aspects of the life cycle. And associations, whether we're ready or not, are being pulled into this shift. And I should mention that although this webinar is really about education, a lot of what we're talking about is applicable to other programs, especially within associations. We could be talking about publications or conferences and events. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, as I mentioned, not a trend. AI is here. Get used to it. AI has ranked as a top learning priority for multiple years now. So in 2026, the Learning and Development Global Sentiment Survey shows something important, which is that AI is still ranked as #1 in terms of what's on people's minds, but that interest has stopped accelerating. So that signals a shift, right? That it's now moved from a fascination to a what do we do about it? We're moving into what I call the implementation reality phase. And that's where the expectations start to increase. That's where your timelines start to shrink. And that's where some of the old assumptions that we're used to start breaking down. So what does that mean for us? Get my buttons to work. Oh no. Okay, there we go. Okay, why now? We've been talking about AI for a couple of years, but why are we now talking about this next step? So as we all know, as we're probably all faced with, associations are facing some similar structural pressures that are both internal and external. A big one is our subject matter expert, our SME scarcity. we are the same if you volunteer for an organization. There's fewer people, we have less time every day. And the whole model of volunteering has shifted from what it was 10, 20 years ago to micro-volunteering, to project-based work. And so that's going to have an impact on your production cycle impacts. When we're talking about traditional course development, which can sometimes take more than a year, wouldn't it be great if we could front load the work so your volunteers can spend more time on the reasons that you've actually come to them, which is not reading a bunch of books and it's not sourcing material from a huge library, right? So that's one of our challenges. We were also looking at faster content cycles. The demand for rapidly updated content, relevant content, personalized content, it's all around us, and it requires a more agile and efficient content creation process than what associations are typically used to. A lot of us also have to contend with the idea of a global association and global learners, especially in a virtual world now that things are so much more accessible. Reaching and engaging a diverse worldwide audience necessitates content that's both accessible and also resonates across different cultures, time zones, sometimes languages. You can't take a course for a specific audience in the US, plug it into something in India and expect to have the same results, right? So how do you do that without recreating 10 different courses? We're also facing rising production costs. This is nothing new, but it should be mentioned. Traditional content program development methods, again, in all of your program areas, are becoming increasingly expensive, and that's straining budgets. And if you're in an association like mine, your budget is already pretty tight. We're talking lean budgets, lean teams. So what do we do about it? Compounded by that is the demand for personalization. That's the next Netflixification of the world, right? The Amazon experience. Your learners are no different. They're expecting tailored experiences, and that requires customized content as well as delivery methods to meet not only a group, but individual hyper-personalized needs. And lastly, we're talking about competition. So AI is good and bad for different reasons, right? When we're looking at nonprofit versus for-profit, the for-profits can oftentimes move faster. Sometimes they have bigger budgets. They can invest more aggressively. They can market more heavily. And AI in that case is not just a tool of efficiency, but it's becoming a tool of competition. The good news is it also in other ways levels the playing field for those small, lean teams with limited budgets. Please work. All right. We also have to understand the workforce context. So, we're living somewhat in our association bubble, but there's so much going on externally. According to the World Economic Forum, for instance, 44% of core skills will change over the next few years. And associations are sitting at the smack dab center of that reskilling demand. Some of the fastest growing capability areas include analytical thinking, AI literacy, and continuous learning, all of which go hand in hand with building your AI program, right? Associations are uniquely positioned to respond to these challenges, but only if we can adopt responsibly and scale strategically. AI expands our capacity to do just that, but if we're doing it in a smart way. All right, so we're going to take the first of these Slido polls and we're going to hope that it works. So I want you to take a moment to think about where your organization is today with AI. No right or wrong answer. We're just taking a pulse check just to see kind of as a group where we are. So as the Slido poll starts to populate, go ahead and grab your phone, which if it's like mine, is right next to you at all times. And go ahead and think about that. If you have any additional answers you want to add, some comments, feel free to throw those in the chat. But let's just take a moment to think to see where we are, because I think you'll find it's interesting versus where we were maybe a couple of years ago. Oh gosh, we're all over the place, aren't we? That's great. That's exactly what I expected to see. We'll give a minute or so for people to respond. All right. Yeah, a pretty even split. Okay, so as you're continuing to filter in the rest of your results, I'm going to go ahead and kind of speak to this a little bit. So if you'll notice, 5% of us or so are scaling strategically. That's totally to be expected, right? It hasn't been around that long, but we're still at, we know what's going on. We need to be doing something about that. But you can see there's so many of us that haven't even started looking at that. And there's a lot of considerations and challenges that could come into play. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, it's great to see so many of you that are in the exploring, learning, piloting phase. That shows that this is a conversation that you didn't just start having, but that you've likely already been having. Like I said, if I ran this poll a year ago even, I would expect dramatically different results. So thanks for that. All right, so now let's get into the meat of it. AI across the education lifecycle. It's really important to think about how you can implement AI in this more holistic way. AI can do everything from supporting the creation of educational content to the way you curate and organize your resources and your reference library. It's really great for customizing delivery experiences, as well as the operational processes behind your programs, which again is very cross-functional. Most organizations I find start in one of these areas, especially when we're talking about piloting and just starting out, but it's really the connection of all of these is where that long-term value comes into play. So I want to talk through a little bit each, a little bit more detail so you can see kind of how that may fit with you. So AI for content creation, I think this is an area that most of us are the most familiar with. It's using ChatGPT to create a recipe from all the ingredients you have in your fridge or creating an AI image. But it's incredibly effective in early stage creation. For education programs in particular, it can help you to draft outlines and storyboards and scripts and question banks and assessment checks and micro learning summaries and structuring kind of how those modules look. If you think of AI as getting you from a blank page to a working draft, it is great at overcoming that writer's block. But we have to think about AI not being on autopilot, right? This is the first place where we want to have that human touch point. Our humans, our SMEs, our instructional designers, they provide the authority and the checkpoint all along the way. This allows your subject matter expert, though, to spend more time on judgment, reviewing an existing draft rather than on formatting and that whole idea of pulling everything together themselves, which is often where you'll see those bottlenecks. And for your team, this changes the role of learning professionals. We're moving from the idea of traditional content producers to what I call learning architects. And in doing so, AI is essentially repositioning our expertise into some of those skills that I talked about earlier. All right, the next area is content curation. So now we're going from talking about creating original content to working with and optimizing what you already have. So again, if you're like me, your association has tons of content, maybe decades worth of content. This is a big hidden opportunity. The problem being that your content is oftentimes hidden across multiple different platforms, multiple different formats. They don't speak to one another, right? But if you start to integrate AI into your content management system, into your online repositories, you can begin to do things like tagging your libraries using smart meta tags from your AI that can help to sort content more quickly and identify patterns. You can use it to summarize archives. This is another great one for your SMEs, is giving them access to 10 books, but then saying, here's our tool that you can summarize what you need in a minute from all of those resources. You can use it to repackage content. So this is a big one. Reformatting content from an existing long form content into other pieces of content. This is content strategy 101. We're talking about chunking of content without the manual work of having to recreate a piece of content every single time. That extends the sustainability and marketability of a piece of content, and it just allows your team, to breathe a little. The last one is mapping to skills framework. So again, I mentioned AI is really great at identifying patterns and cross-triangulating different types of content, different types of data sets. It can help you identify gaps in your audience segments, in your personas. And all of this unlocks some new value from what are already existing assets that might just be sitting somewhere collecting dust on your digital shelf. The curation stage is also where I find some of that ROI happens the fastest in terms of indirectly through time saved. So let's move on to the next one. Oh, a quick tip on curation. As I mentioned, we all have so much content. You don't need to start with new content every time. We need to think about rather transforming and optimizing existing content. Sometimes that's as simple as adding meta tags and updating links. Sometimes it's more about reformatting. But like I said, AI then in turn, by rechunking the content, allows you to extend the life cycle of a piece of content. It reduces the development cost of recreating a piece of content, and it respects your institutional knowledge. So associations are built on their authority. And if we're using the long form content as our source of truth, then as we chunk it out into these different forms and smaller formats, we can be sure that it is still achieving that original accuracy and authority. Okay, so let's move on now to education delivery. This is a really interesting and exciting one because I think this is where a lot of the technological advances are happening currently. It happens in a few different ways, right? So AI can support, for example, video. We're talking about creating a custom video from nothing using something like a Sora or a Midjourney, where you can throw in a reference image or two and it creates, your 8 to 12-second clip that you stitch together. You can also use it for AI avatar software like your HeyGen and your Synthesia. The AI generated video, especially with the avatars, is really great when it comes to versioning. If you have something that needs to be updated every so often, it standardizes your audio quality. It allows for instant translations. And then you don't have to deal with traditional headaches of video production, like different schedules, accents, finding your talent, editing the content. It makes all of that so much quicker, so much easier, especially when you're looking to build more modular content in which you can just pull out and plug in a few things at a time. Another area where we're seeing AI take off is that simulated instruction, your augmented reality, your virtual reality. AI is really helpful on the back end to power those realistic simulations for hands-on learning experiences. So for AS&T, where I work, hands-on learning is hugely important for the industry. And we're finding that the challenges of recreating the hands-on learning experience in a virtual environment, and AI is opening up some new doorways that didn't exist before. AI is also really helpful with adaptive learning pathways. It can power your learning pathways that are structured within your LMS based on role, learner type, topic, and can then help with individual student progress, adapt to individual learner needs. We all learn differently. We've always all learned differently. But with traditional instructor-led methods, there's only so much you can do in a classroom setting. And until recently, on-demand asynchronous learning mirrored instructor-led learning in that way. It is now only more recently that we can start to adapt to those individual learning styles and individual learning pathways. And then lastly, AI tutoring. This one's an easy, it's kind of a, it's a low-hanging fruit. We're talking about a study buddy, a coach, kind of a AI peer-to-peer. It can give you immediate access, feedback, consistency in terms of responses, and that personalized support. So all of this together really creates that Netflixification effect, if you will. The goal of this being, it's not, again, about novelty. We're talking about accessibility that may not have existed before, flexibility, as well as scalability and the ability to work at the individual level and then scale up to large numbers. Okay. Quick soapbox from me. If it doesn't improve learning, it's a gimmick. Now, I'm talking about AI in this case, but we can really talk about anything, right? We want to use AI to solve problems. We don't want to use AI just to use AI. So when you're thinking about AI or really technology in general, it's really prudent to think from a strategy and solution mindset first. At the end of the day, your core business strategy, your strategic plan, your mission, it should be platform agnostic. All of the challenges that you're trying to solve for, you should be able to do so in a number of different ways. So if you work from that mindset rather than the AI first mindset, it's a lot easier to think about AI integrating more into the fabric and ecosystem of your learning environment rather than a separate siloed operation. All right, end soapbox. Last area is AI for operations. So as I mentioned, this one is probably the most cross-functional because you can really plug it into so many different parts of your business model. And again, this is where leaders sometimes see really great results, like the curation stage. So AI, for example, can reduce your actual course building timelines. We know that traditional development times can sometimes take a year or more, depending on how long a course is. And in that time, you may have lost however many subject matter experts. It saves your subject matter experts hours upon hours of sourcing material, and it helps in terms of reducing complexity of updating material. So as I mentioned before, if you're working from very traditional formats, sometimes it's harder to take a long form video of a talking head in front of a screen and create a modernized, revised version of that course. It's helpful also with improving your data insights. AI is great with data as long as you have a human reviewing that data. It's great with responsiveness and creating consistency. And that, again, is really important in the learner experience. So a quick data point here as well. PricewaterhouseCoopers research, it shows that productivity gains in the 25-40% range for AI-assisted work. Again, that is huge, but the caveat is that only when teams are trained and supported. So we'll talk a little bit later about the importance of training and adopting and championing your AI strategy and pilot. And kudos to anyone who noticed the third hand on the AI picture. And Nicole, just stop me if there's anything coming up in the chat. All right. Okay, so another major trend that we're seeing come out that is directly impacting AI is showing value. This is a rising leadership expectation. You may have noticed your senior team, your executives increasingly want greater ROI, more substantive workforce impact, better strategic outcomes. We've gone past activity and vanity metrics into really getting into the meat of those KPIs. And so when we're talking about AI, the conversations really need to be framed in terms of value language. The most recent LinkedIn report shows impact management remains one of the top challenges for learning and development globally. And that aligns directly with that rise of showing value in their survey. So as AI lowers content production times, your executives are naturally going to start asking, okay, so this is faster and cheaper. Where's the return now? What are we able to measure? So this is where we start to introduce the idea that AI without measurement will increase scrutiny by your leadership team rather than reduce it. So as we start to bring the AI on, we have to start to be thinking in terms of how do we measure it? How do we govern it? We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Quick case study. Full disclosure, this is the AS&T case study, but I've left it purposely generic because I want you to think about your own organization and how it may fit into this, because I think you'll find one or more similarities. So in our case, we saw all of these challenges in terms of our learning program. We saw those SME bottlenecks. They are limited. They are burned out because they're working on 5 different projects from 5 different teams. Our learners are increasingly global. Our membership is more than half international. We needed education across different regions and fast. And sometimes that would speak to different standards. And then large content archives. AS&T, for example, has been around since 1941. We've had a monthly journal for at least that long. So we're talking about legacy content, new content, podcasts, articles, webinars, conference proceedings, living in all their different siloed worlds and not being accessible, as well as not being able to start to bring content together in strategic ways. And the need to scale. I mean, this is probably everybody, right? There's always the need or the ask to do more with less, to modernize what you're doing, and to do it yesterday. So maybe this sounds familiar to a few of you. What we did in our case was not a massive transformation. It wasn't a big bang. It was small pilots, a series of small pilots that we then start to work into that life cycle. For example, using AI, LLM style AI agents to draft content. Like I said, those outlines, those storyboards, then using AI to take whatever script was created and vetted by your SMEs and putting that into your AI video avatar software, creating that explainer video, as well as interactive platforms. There's now a lot of tools that are both baked into your LMS, that are baked into your different course development software that have this AI function that helps with the actual course build, which is oftentimes another area where we're seeing those significant bottlenecks, right? Your instructional designer needs all of this time to physically format content into asynchronous learning. AI tagging as well, really helpful. Bringing together all of your content into something like a digital asset management system, hugely helpful to find what you need in a fraction of the time. And then all of that to help support exam preparation using AI, going back to that idea of the study buddy and helping our learners outside of providing the straight content. For us, this was a series of small experiments that were very low risk. So if they didn't work out, it wasn't a big deal. If they did, it provided enough value and confidence for us to then adopt more sustainable and scalable models building on those pilots. But we also learned lessons, as we always do. And one of those lessons was about change management. Change management matters so much. Effectively managing change and managing your projects is crucial for the success of any pilot program, of anything you do. Making sure that everybody is informed and educated and looped in every step of the way. Maybe that's through a RACI chart, maybe that's for more direct involvement. It also needs to be, realized and accepted that not every pilot is going to scale, and that's okay. It's important to recognize not all of your initiatives will be suitable for broader implementation. That may be because it was always created for a very small or niche function and there's no need to scale it, or maybe it just didn't work in the way you expected it to. It's also important to understand governance. Governance is needed early. Establishing clear structures from the outset before you even build anything is absolutely essential. Otherwise, you're just having more work in the long run if you have to go back and fix something or do QC, or if you're worried that, the accuracy of the original outline creation, and staff training. That goes along with change management. Adequate training for your staff that's involved in the pilot especially. So that could be somebody working directly to build the pilot. That could be your marketing team whose job it is to promote whatever that tool is, and your customer support team, for example, who will be fielding customer queries. All of those people should be informed at some level. This will all be pivotal to your success with that pilot. And then when it comes to AI, getting your team to adopt and hopefully eventually champion what you're doing reduces friction at the organizational level. And in turn, it makes it easier to promote to your members. So you start out by being the champion, you spread the adoption among your team, everybody's a champion, evangelizes whatever you're doing, and then it makes it so much easier to make your members excited and train them on those same things. And the last one is that innovation includes retiring ideas. This goes along with the not every pilot scales. True innovation and the ability to know when to move on involves the ability to discontinue or retire those initiatives that aren't performing as you expected. We all have sacred cows, and sometimes you just have to call it when enough is enough. If you fail fast and you move on and you're working with low-hanging fruit, the impact to your business operations and to perception by your leadership team will be dramatically smaller. So those are some things that we learned. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in terms of showing value, interestingly, what we're seeing from that global sentiment survey is that AI is not reducing pressure on learning teams as we expect that it might. We're actually seeing record levels of stress. Why? Teams are experimenting more. You've got one or more pilots running, your tools are multiplying, your tech stack might be, 100 long. But things like the governance, the clarity of roles, and your operating models haven't necessarily caught up with how quickly technology is moving. Associations with lean teams, this matters to you enormously. Without those guardrails in place at the very onset, that experimentation that's so fun is going to turn into chaos. And at the end of the day, scope creep, time loss, money loss. So you really want all of that hand in hand. So I'm going to go more now into the importance of governance, which is not always the most glamorous part of AI, but so important to have that hand-in-hand conversation. This is why it matters. These are all the different risks that you may see. And again, some of this speaks to technology as a whole, but especially the AI conversation. Right. So some of the risks include privacy risks, ensuring that sensitive information is handled securely as well as ethically. That's your user data, that's your backend company data, as well as your intellectual property. Speaking of intellectual property, copyright is a big one right now in terms of AI cases showing up in the courts. Respecting intellectual property rights and usage policies is a big gray area right now, because even if you're using AI to create an original piece of content, it is training on something, right? That is what the AI is at its core. It is training on models and regurgitating existing content. So if you're using, for example, AI to create a new song, be aware, what are the sources that it's training on? If it's something that you don't already own the copyright to, you don't own the copyright to that song that the AI created. And so that's where you have to really start to dig and see and maybe have those closed systems. Bias has been around since the beginning of AI. We're seeing that come out in various forms. So identifying and mitigating those unfair or sometimes prejudiced outcomes. Again, we're talking about source content created by humans that is aggregated into these big data pools. And AI is essentially just telling you what you want to hear, which sometimes may have that tinge of bias to it. Accuracy, of course, it goes without saying, maintaining that the correctness, the reliability of the information. Your quality control process is an ongoing task. Your association is built on trust. If you're giving out wrong information and you don't know it, you will very easily start to erode that trust. Transparency is also another big one. You need to be open and clear about your processes and your decisions that involve AI. If you've ever seen an AI video or an image, we've all seen that. I think Coca-Cola commercial over the holidays, that was a big flop. You can tell, right? Your members can too. And if they can tell and you're not upfront about when you're using the AI, you're once again risking that trust. And lastly, talking about risk-averse leadership concerns. Your leaders at the end of the day aren't so worried about AI on its own. They worry about your brand reputation and your trust. Being open and clear about the decisions and processes with them will also go a long way in building trust, both internally as well as externally, when we're talking about volunteer leadership teams like your boards. If trust is the currency of associations, then governance is the tool that we can use to protect that trust. All right. Okay. So governance, a starter kit. Big scary word, right? You may want to run off and use AI to create a 40-page manual policy. Don't do that. Please don't do that. If you do, don't attach my name to it. Start small. Start simple. Use KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Start with acceptable use guidelines. Start with human review requirements. Where are those touch points where you may want human authority review, as well as the boundaries of your pilot. This will help to alleviate scope creep, mission creep, and then clear ownership, identifying who is doing what and making sure that all parts of that are covered by those human touch points as well. And then evaluation metrics. So once again, before you even get started, know what you want to measure, how you want to measure it consistently in a sustainable way so that your results are really valid. And as a bonus, if you already have an AI organizational strategy, plug into that. More often than not, you are not thinking about AI alone in your program. Maybe you're spearheading it, but everything needs to tie back into mission. So if you're tied into your organization's larger AI conversation, maybe you even have a formalized governance group, maybe you're working cross-functionally, you're going to have greater success in how your organization positions AI to your members, and in turn, that knowledge sharing in terms of the platform use and the visibility, it all goes together. One more soapbox before we go. If you don't set those guardrails, your staff will guess, they will experiment, chaos will ensue. Guessing essentially introduces risk. And again, your leaders are not fond of that risk. Clarity in turn will build confidence that you know your team is using things correctly, efficiently, but also confidence in what they're using and confidence in what the output of the AI is providing. One more question for you all. So after thinking about all this, maybe even think about your operation, what is the biggest barrier in your organizations to moving forward with AI right now? And that might be within your immediate team, within your program. It may be in your larger organization. But again, I'll give you all a moment to scan the QR code, and we'll see where we land. And it could be a combination of things as well, right? A lot of the times, some of these go hand in hand. And if one piece falls into place, then the next one is that much easier to achieve. So yeah, a good deal of leadership hesitation. We'll speak to that in the next few slides as well. And where to start. This is why you're here today, right? Practical tips. So we'll get to that as well. Maybe you already have a few ideas. Lack of staff time. Again, that's a big one. You know, AI is great at saving time, but it's not a set it and forget it. You can't just use it on its own without any human oversight and expect it to perform the way you want it to. It takes time to train the AI. It takes time to maintain, you know, your quality control over it. All of that requires some staff time. So even though maybe your staff is taking away time from some of these manual processes, it's plugging some of that time back into maintaining the AI that's supporting those processes now. All right, we'll move on. Okay, so let's take now the 30,000-foot view and take a step back. When it comes to your greater strategic alignment, most organizations move through stages, the AI maturity path, in this way, starting with experimentation, informal, individual level, moving into pilots. We're a little bit more organized, maybe have some resources behind it, into integration with multiple products, programs, systems, and then finally to scaling and having that more holistic ecosystem view. Skipping those steps, which sometimes happens, creates resistance, especially among teams and leadership, and it introduces risk. If you're going straight to integrating, you want to skip all the experimentation, you know this is what you want to do and it doesn't work out, well, you don't have that historical background to say whether or not there was a chance of it working in the first place. Right. But most associations, we're at the early stages. That is normal. That is safe. There's a lot playing into that. We're talking about how quickly the speed of technology is moving. You start to look at something and then a day later, a new shiny object has appeared over here. Well, do you stick to this thing or do you run over to the new one? I feel like that's happening more and more because not only is AI becoming more accessible, all of the AI companies are now, it's making it more accessible for them to develop products. And it's really hard to sift through all the noise. As I mentioned in the poll, leadership buy-in is also sometimes where you find that that wall. Maybe you don't have a team that is supportive. Maybe you don't have the budget prioritization. Maybe your board has other things on its mind, or maybe you just don't know where to start. And even when we're talking about something like an education program, as a standalone, it can be a little bit overwhelming. I'll say to you this, if you have a solid foundation in place and you're starting kind of the early stages, it's a lot easier to then plug in new tools. It's a lot easier to avoid that shiny object syndrome. Like I mentioned before, if you're working from a solution-first mindset, your foundation then is based on your operations and greater strategy rather than how can we fit this project to the tool. Okay, so this is different. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about leadership buy-in and this idea of managing up. So managing up is oftentimes a part of AI adoption. What it means essentially is that you as the champion, as the program leader, or as just a staff advocate are intentionally working to make your team, your boss, the senior team more effective so that you and what you're doing in your work have a greater chance of succeeding. If you, for example, understand your manager's goals, their pressures and challenges, as well as their style and interests, it proactively adapts. By managing up, you can proactively adapt how you work and communicate with them. And that in turn will help your project to succeed and get off the stages. That's when you can start to then move through those various maturity stages, especially if you're starting at the beginning and you're not asking for the moon, right? You're not asking for $10,000 to go right into something. So how do we do this? We start with low risk pilots. Your leadership team will love if you don't ask them for the $10,000. And then share some small wins. And maybe $10,000 is not a lot for you, but it's for my association. Share small wins, right? With your team, with your boss, with your volunteer corps. That builds buy-in and excitement. and tie it to your mission and member value. It shouldn't really have to be said, but it needs to be, right? Everything you do in an association should be tied to your mission, your member value, your strategic plan. And then it is an interesting one. Frame AI as risk mitigation. So I know I sound like a hypocrite because I just went through talking about how much risk there is inherent in AI. But your role as the champion is to show that not experimenting with AI also carries risk. It's that, are we going to be left behind if we don't do anything? Also looking at competitor movement. What are the for-profits doing? What are your sister societies and associations doing? These other organizations may be moving much more quickly, and your members are going to compare experiences, and they don't care if you're a not-for-profit versus a for-profit. They're going to want that same experience. As I mentioned, at the end of the day, your leaders don't fear AI, they fear unmanaged risk. And so these are some tips to kind of overcome that. Are we on time? Good. Okay. So strategic alignment, again, tying it to the greater mission. AI initiatives must support your mission, your member value, some things like workforce development that a lot of us are facing right now, supporting revenue when it's appropriate, as well as revenue diversification. Maybe your AI tools are introducing new revenue, non-member due revenue streams that didn't previously exist, and that global reach, especially if this is a big part of your association. Your technology as a whole should always serve one or more of these purposes. And if it's not serving your strategy in some ways, it is in some ways just a distraction or a gimmick. Okay, so this is where I'm giving you homework. You don't need permission oftentimes to start very small because we're not talking about expending a lot of time or resources, right? There's a few things that you can try today, next week, next month. These are some tips. They're not necessarily things that you have to do in this order, but you can, pick and choose what makes the most sense for you. For example, running one low risk pilot. Pick something that is easy to measure using your SMART measurement. Pick something that is not extremely time consuming and is not going to introduce a lot of risk in terms of revenue if it doesn't succeed, and that you're able to use as a case study for larger implementations. If it's so niche and one-off that it doesn't really play into your overall strategy, it might not be the right fit, but it might be. Draft a simple guideline. So we talked a little bit about the governance starter kit and what needs to be included. Be thinking about that immediately. If you're thinking about acceptable use cases, human touch points, who's involved, that may also help you to determine who's going to be on that project team, who needs to be consulted, where are the stakeholders, and where are these potential challenges and bottlenecks as they may come up. And then training staff. Prompting is a really easy way to start. If you train your staff or your team or your coworkers by sharing resources or taking quick courses on prompting, they will immediately see results in terms of output and more accurate answers. So that education piece is really important, again, to having some successful buy-in both internally, and then if this is a customer-facing product, you in turn need to educate your members. You can't expect to launch something that is especially cutting-edge technology and expect them to not only immediately adopt it, but to understand how to use it. It is an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing strategy. And lastly, measure the impact. So this goes along with potential running your low risk pilot. Make sure you have that measurement system in place. I skipped one, which is audit your content library. That's a great one if you were like us and your content lived in 10 different places. If you can understand where the content is, what format, then you can see what needs to happen to bring all of that together to have a consistent conversation that speaks to each content piece. And lastly, I didn't write this down, but if you are struggling with that leadership buy-in piece, prepare a short brief. Some of the, provide data, provide that competitive scan, maybe do, a SWOT analysis. Where do we rank in terms of our competitors in the nonprofit and for-profit space? What is that risk, again, of not implementing some sort of AI tool or technology accelerator into our program? Okay, last little thing. If you did not pay attention to the last, what are we at? 48 minutes, I'll leave you with this. Start small, learn fast. Sometimes that means to fail fast, as well as scaling thoughtfully, strategically. If you do all these three things, then you're now creating sustainable innovation. At the end of the day, there's that hesitation about AI as replacing roles and staff, but it's not about that replacement. It's not replacing your SMEs. It's not replacing your instructional designers, your videographer, your marketing team. It is about augmenting what they are doing and scaling the expertise. So it's switching the idea, for example, of that content producer to a learning architect. It's freeing up time for your teams, for your SMEs that were previously spent on time-consuming, tedious manual processes, and allowing them that headspace sometimes to think about higher level, more strategic plans. Maybe they're working on a completely separate product, and that's where you start to build that buy-in and excitement when you start to see the time saved. All right, so that's everything that I've got for you today. I'm going to open it up now for questions, and I will have one question that I'm just curious about. If you want to go ahead and throw that in the chat, which is, of everything that we've talked about today, or maybe something you've already done, what feels the most accessible or realistic for you to try in your organization? And again, maybe you already have, and maybe you have something that's not already on the list. But I'm really curious to hear. And if anybody would like to also raise a hand and pop on screen, that would be great too. Curating content. Yes. Yeah, that's a big one. And I feel like, especially when you're working sometimes in the siloed environment of a program or department, and a lot of associations are built around those more traditional silos, is that you only really have visibility into your program and your systems. And sometimes if that content is living somewhere else in a different system, it makes it that much harder to start connecting the dots. And that's why having that greater organizational strategy around AI sometimes helps to bring together that connective tissue that may not have existed in the first place. All right. Yes, the question was, what feels the most realistic or accessible for you to try, or maybe something they've already integrated into your operations? Yeah. So the starting small, curation, making connections, super helpful. Yeah, you don't want to lose that inherent knowledge piece of your membership. Like we said, associations are really built on trust, and in leveraging your SMEs in these different ways and bringing them into the conversation, letting them use the tools hands-on themselves, you're still maintaining that institutional knowledge, but then accelerating it and compounding it, right? Machine learning. Yeah, Daniel. Hi, Daniel. Um, would love to hear more about what you're doing in the machine learning space. So Daniel's also in the NDT industry. You feel like hopping on? I won't make you, but I might email you later. All right. Yeah, using AI to create scripts and training videos. Absolutely.
I see Daniel came off mute.
Daniel, go ahead.
Oh, how's it going? Can y'all hear me just fine?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm playing with right now in the AI space is whenever you can generate these quizzes and keep track of all the questions that they got wrong, you can actually tie those questions directly into content that they already went over. And whenever they go over that quiz, you can actually extract that lesson content from that, and now they have their focus area. So you don't really have to get too much machine learning in. It's more of a filter tool, but you can streamline exactly what their weaknesses are. And I think that's going to be a very powerful tool whenever you can figure out what their weaknesses are and then streamline it. Because right now, there's some companies that don't have the greatest educational platform set up. And whenever they move from one company to another, they may have higher standards, and there's not really a good, I guess, refresher course out there from hardly anybody. But if you're not needing the full course and the level 3 to 5 off on it, it should be a little bit cheaper.
Yeah.
But streamlining their actual weaknesses and then streamlining their education would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Like I say, I think that adaptive learning aspect is not one that's been as fully fleshed out as some of the other areas to explore. But yeah, what you're doing sounds great. And I think there'll be a lot of value in that. All right. Implementing strategies into strategic plan. Yeah, that's a big one. If you can get some amount of AI or technology adoption language into your board's conversation, maybe even into some of those strategic planning documents, then all of a sudden you have the runway for that resource request. It's a lot easier if you already have something budgeted in to say, we're going to explore AI in the next year. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like because the technology changes so fast, but at least you have some of that budget earmarked for it. AI in place of physical instructors. Yeah, and it's not to say it always has to be that replacement or one or the other. You can use hybrid systems. You can have live instructors on call, in chats. There's always, I think, that balance of the value of human instructor and just the amount of historical, anecdotal knowledge that they can provide that is not going to be captured the same way as, on your avatar video, for example. All right. So if you have any additional questions, I'm going to throw my email here in the chat. I would love to speak with you, or if you have some interesting implementations that you've tried, feel free to reach out to me. And otherwise, Nicole, I think I'll just turn it